that has not happened, and that might not ever happen. But art is a mimesis in Aristotle's term. So we know that nothing is original, and that it has been taken from somewhere. It has been we so whatever an artist produces, it has a reference in the real world. Now, Chris also talks about something called aesthetic ambiguity. And so I did not quite understand what she meant by aesthetic ambiguity. So if you could touch upon this as well. Now also, the next part is the dynamics of response. So here, using psychoanalysis to analyze the reader's mind and how the reader responds to a particular work. So say understanding the reader's response. Now, Freud sees fiction as an outlet of unconscious wishes, and another researcher, Lesser, says that fiction provides an outlet for idealistic and contemplative tendencies thwarted in our daily experiences. So say so so Freud, I mean there's a contrast between what the two are saying. Now the example that the researcher gives is Nathaniel Hawthorne's story The Birthmark. So the hero's obsessive wish to get his wife rid of the birthmark that she has. Now the next part is by Holland. He's another researcher, and he says that the pleasure we get from literature is a transformation of unconscious wishes and fears into culturally acceptable meanings. So say I read a poem and I interpret it differently, and I use my ego and my super ego to 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 get the to kind of take what I want from that particular work. So say if we're talking about say the work Julius Caesar. So I might think that what the murder of Caesar was wrong, and that should not have been done. And according to my belief, that is wrong. But say Tatsam or say Shikha, you believe you think that violence is fine, and you think the reason with which Plutus or the others had killed Caesar was valid. So that would be your takeaway from it. Now say somebody who has a very violent mindset, or say somebody who has been is say has a very uh, terrorist kind of background. So their takeaway from a particular work would be different. Or say, let's talk about Edgar Allan Poe's works. So somebody who has had a similar childhood will perceive the work differently, and somebody or like us, we have had. I think all of us have had a fairly good childhood. So our understanding of the work would be very different, and we would perceive it differently. So somebody who has had a traumatic childhood would kind of resonate, would kind of understand what Edgar Allan Poe is trying to talk about, and would sympathize and empathize with him. But we would see it as a very traumatic and a very eerie and a very horror experience, a very deadly experience. Now, the next topic is by Carl Jung, and it's called archetypal criticism. So Jung talks about the collective unconscious. So Carl Jung talks about an idea that it is genetically inherited and not shaped by personal experience. So say something that is common in all men and is not personal. So say something like spirituality or sexual behavior, or like Sir had mentioned yesterday, life and death instincts. So they are common to all men, and that is not something that we have. Sorry, that is not something that we have uh, gained from personal experience, but that is something that we have genetically inherited from our ancestors. Now, instincts and archetypes. So they are signs, symbols, or patterns of thinking and behaving that have been inherited from our ancestors. So, for example, we can also say that terrorism, in a way, is a collective unconscious. I don't agree to the fact that all of it is inherited, because we see and we learn, and that is how I mean, it's not it's what as a child, what we have is just the id, the super ego, and the ego is developed later on, so through our experiences. And so what I think is that what Jung says about genetically inheriting something, I don't particularly agree to that. Now, Jung also talks about persona, and persona is having a different personality. So every single human being has a different personality. We do have traits that are similar to our family members and to the people around us, but there is an individuality that all of us have. Now again, he also talks about something called the anima and the animus. So every man has a feminine side to him, and every woman has a masculine side to her. So that is also something that he talks about. Now, Jung also mentions that he wants the work of art. He does not want a work of art to be scrutinized by a psychoanalyst. So he wants the work of art to be critiqued and understood from the perspective of aesthetics, and not from that of a psychoanalyst. So,
Yeah. So which were the points that you were looking for clarification?
so,
Uh,
so,
and
the
I didn't get your point about what did you say? Terrorism? I didn't
okay,
hear
sir.
you.
So about the collective unconscious. So I think terrorism is also a form of collective unconscious. If I mean, so that has been, I mean, living. For example, I read this interview of Osama bin Laden's son, and he was talking about how uh, how his father had become the way he was, become a very lost man because of how his grandfathers, and how so he was living in Saudi, so over there, the environment over there, so that is how he had become like that. So collective unconscious, not on a global scale, but then, like we were talking about, I think you're talking about Hinduism or something like that. So when we talk about religion, the first thing that comes to our mind in our context is Hinduism, or say, you know the different, what do we say, rituals that we have. So similarly, uh, be a person who is surrounded by people who have a very violent mindset, or say a very terrorist kind of environment. So say somebody living in Afghanistan, or say somebody living in Kurdistan, they will have that kind of instincts, and they will have that kind of, say, unconscious, and their reaction, or their behavior will be so. And similarly, in Osama bin Laden's case, that is what was happening. So the 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 school that he was in, and the university that he went to, the kind of people that he interacted with, so that all of that contributed to his unconscious, or as a terrorist. So does that make sense, sir?
I'm not really sure what do you mean by terrorist very often.
Okay,
Who
so
is
sir, I mean terrorism as a collective unconscious. So
I don't think Jung is talking about that.
sorry.
I don't think Jung is talking
No, no,
about
no, sir, he's not talking about it. He's not
yeah,
talking about it. I am saying that can that be, can
seen
terrorism
from
be something, yeah, as yeah, from the perspective of a collective unconscious. That is what I'm saying.
So first, I think you have to understand what we mean by collective unconscious.
Okay.
One. Secondly, what we mean by terrorism,
Okay.
right? In order to see if there is any relation.
Okay.
So, what do you mean by terrorism?
I mean, so there's
Bhagat Singh was a great freedom fighter, right? But in the eyes of British Empire, he was a terrorist.
terrorist. Yes. Yes.
Why? Because he challenged and opposed that power. So, what is a terrorist then?
So then again, that becomes subjective.
Not very subjective, but contextual,
Okay.
right? For Indians who are fighting for freedom, acts of violence were seen as acts of freedom struggle, right? Uh, Bombings or killings. But for the oppressors, it is seen as act of terrorism. So who looks at that violence is also one question that we have to ask ourselves when we talk about terrorism as if it's a universal, everybody knows who is a terrorist, for example, right? Or if uh, so we have to first historically contextualize the act of violence, right? And to see, to label it as terrorism or not terrorism. Is all kind of violence terrorism? Is a question. In an act of war, hundreds of innocent people die. When two atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it destroyed two cities, right? And millions of people who had nothing to do with war died because of these two atomic bombs. Is that an act of terrorism?
So from the Japanese perspective, yes. But then when it comes from the when we see from the American perspective, no, because they were at war, and then what they did was
So when you are at
according
war,
to them.
usually the soldiers are killed, right? But the people living in the city
Yes.
were didn't wake up after they were bombed. So is it from Japanese perspective that you say it's terrorism? From our perspective, as an Indian, what how will you categorize it?
So it's difficult to categorize because
Yeah. So first thing is that when we one of the jobs of critical theory and critical criticism is to look at things that are being normalized as being constructed. For example, people are regularly labeled as terrorists, but as thinking people, we have to ask for definitions and clarifications and ask ourselves whether there is some politics to it. Right? Nobody talks of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as acts of terrorism, right? But then millions of innocent people died, just like millions of Jews were killed by Hitler and Nazis, right? So for us, the problem is how to define terrorism. It's not an easy task. That is, so you should be aware of the complexity of trying to define this. Whenever we use it very simply, we overlook these complexities. That's the first point. Second point is related to collective unconscious that Jung is forwarding. So what does he mean by collective unconscious?
so he says that collective unconscious is what has been inherited by your ancestors, and something that you have not uh, gotten from personal experience. So
Mhm.
say he gives the example of, he says, spirituality, and then the life death instinct, or say
Uh,
sexual
what,
behavior.
what he is trying to say is like what Freud is saying about Oedipal theory, right? Oedipal complex is the incestuous on conflict arising from incestuous desires in human unconscious at very young age, right? And it's found across in everyone according to Freud, and there is some sort of universalism which is extremely problematic in psychoanalysis as well as Marxism. Means these are the theories, they talk about certain cultures, say for example European cultures, but can you extend them universally to all the cultures is a big problem. You cannot simply do that, right? So one of the problems with Freud and Marx is some sort of universalism that we think of, that what is applicable in European cultural context is applicable to Indian or African or Chinese context as well. Now that is something that we have to be careful of. So Freud has this problem, right, in universalizing, and so there is a problem of universalization involved in modernity itself. When we look at all these literary criticism and theory, we have to be careful because these are Western literary criticism and theory ideas, right? So how, to what extent are they universal is something that we have to be skeptical about. We have to be suspicious about these ideas and claims. So Jung is making such universalistic claim by saying that human race, right? By belonging to particular race, you have a kind of unconscious which is not individual specific. Like say for example, everybody has kidneys, right? It is not specific to me or Tatsam कि उनको ही kidney है. All human beings have kidneys, right? So in that sense, he is saying there is unconscious which is common to all human species. And that is what he means by racial unconscious, that it's part of human race. And he says that there are patterns and conflicts and drives in that unconscious which control human behavior at global level at times. And it's often revealed in diagrams like mandala or swastik and cross and om, and you will find similar kind of images. For example, anima and animus, male and female, and androgyne, for example, is a very important archetype. So he uses the term archetype to describe those patterns which are common to not individuals but the collective unconscious, right? And so androgyne has this anima animus thing, which means that every male has a female and every female has a male side, is at unconscious level, is kind of theory that he is positing. That is, so you find in Ardhanari Nateshwar or that image of Shiv, where half of the image of Shiv is male and half of it is Parvati, right? And Parvati and wife is often called Ardhangini of man, right? So you have these ideas which are not specific to cultures, but you find them in multiple cultures. For example, dying and regenerating God. We submerge or immerse Ganpati and he comes back next year, right? So you find that even in Egyptian societies and other societies. So you find that there are certain myths and motifs which are common to or which are far more pervasive than particular culture. And that was the theory advanced by Jung. So he talks about how human psyche has a spiritual dimension in that sense, that collective unconscious has certain kinds of images, like wise old man that comes in your dream is an archetype, or trickster is an archetype, or so these are various kinds of archetypes that you find according to Jung, right? It has nothing to do with particular maybe political phenomena like terrorism. It's not directly connected to that, but maybe the ritual and symbolic meanings associated with violence may have archetypal patterns or significance. For example, sacrificing human beings. The idea of sacrifice human beings is something that you find in many cultures, or sacrificing animals is something that you find in many cultures, not just one. So that would be archetypal rather than terrorism. Terrorism is largely a kind of political phenomena, right? Part of political struggles. And very often it is related to the idea of state. So anybody who challenges the state says that that person is terrorist, right? So if you challenge German state, then German state will call you a terrorist. So whoever questions the state is terrorist. So it's more of a historical political phenomenon. And archetypes are more about patterns and meanings and images. Right. So hope that clarifies that issue. And when
Yes.
we talk of certain inherent tendencies to become a terrorist or violent person, has to be seen in the context of nature nurture very often, according to psychology. Personalities are shaped not only by nature genetically, but also by nurture and environment. Right. So you cannot resolve nature nurture binary in the sense that it's both nature and nurture. The environment also plays a role, and inherited traits also play a role in personality formation. And personality formation is one of the important theories in Jung. For example, he coined terms like extraversion and introversion, and they become part of pop psychology today. People talk about I am very introverted person or I am very extroverted. So all these terms are coined by Jung, personality types. And they have become part of pop psychology. By pop psychology, you mean that people just brandy about this term in non-technical contexts, right? They have a very specific technical meaning in psychology. But people drop it and drop. So to decide whether your personality is introverted or extroverted, Jung would devise a test, right? So if you on that test, how you fare on that test will tell you whether you're introvert or extrovert. So there is a technical side to these kind of terms, and we should be careful about using technical psychology in popular domain.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
And
about
questions,
the
yeah.
other question that I had, so in the part where the topic called psychoanalysis of the character, Cruise
Hmm.
on Hawthorne.
Hmm.
So over there, there is
Yeah.
this particular there are these few lines that fictional characters are representations of life,
Hmm.
and as such can only be understood if we assume they are real. And this
Right.
assumption only allows us to find unconscious motivation by the same procedure that the traditional critic uses to assign conscious ones.
Right. So if you look at the entire essay by called Classical Freudian Criticism by Elizabeth Wright, then she'd make certain classifications. One is id psychology, right? Those approaches to literature which are based on id psychology. That means it emphasizes id, that is the unconscious drives, incestuous drives, and the conflicts in the early part of psychosexual development. And you find that very often either in authors themselves or you find it in the characters. So when you're looking for uh, the history, the psychobiography of the author in the text becomes something like a manifest dream. Remember we discussed latent and manifest dream in dream work, and the unconscious repressed conflicts are called latent dreams, the latent aspect of dreams. And ego converts latent unconscious conflicts into the symbolic dream structures. So literary texts are also seen as dreams, but the emphasis is on how the latent part of it is author's own unconscious or history of unconscious conflicts is seen in literary text in a symbolic, indirect way. And that is what Marie Bonaparte does in her analysis of Poe. The second example that she gives is the character. The character becomes important in analysis of id, and it is a problematic domain. Why? Because at times you can't make out whether author is talking about these things, whether it is author's unconscious or whether it is uh, the character's unconscious motives that are being represented in the text. So there is this duplicity and ambiguity in writings of Crewe on Frederick Crewe's books on Hawthorne. Right?
Yes, so even what he says about Hawthorne, I did not quite understand what he said because he mentioned the Scarlet Letter, and then I mean it
Yeah,
was not clear what he talks about Hawthorne. So
yeah.
if you could,
Scarlet Letter, if you remember, I don't know if you have read it. The
no, sir, but we have discussed it, so we.
letter S is written on that woman because she has committed adultery. So very often in Hawthorne you find the repressive side of Puritan culture, right? And what do we mean by Puritan culture here? 130 ke baad? Yeah. Yeah. So we are looking at the ambivalence in Lawrence Crewe's analysis of Hawthorne. So one doesn't make out whether Hawthorne is talking, whether Hawthorne's text reveals Hawthorne's unconscious or the character's unconscious. That is the slippery area where Lawrence Crewe is not able to come to kind of definitive conclusion, saying that these motives are in the mind of unconscious mind of Hawthorne or his characters, right? And the context is historical. And Puritans, you have heard of this Puritanism, right? Where have you heard of it?
So
Because
during
that is
our
also
classes,
reflected in D.H. Lawrence analysis of American culture, right?
yes, sir. So we had heard about Puritanism in when we were doing American literature.
Right. So, what is Puritanism and what has that to do with American literature?
So Puritanism was kind of say the foundation of the of America. So
Hmm.
Like it was a kind of moment, sir.
Hmm.
It was from 16th to 17th century.
Okay. What else? Has it only to do with American literature and culture?
So, but also the values that say a particular person has to have. So, say,
Right, but Puritanism as a movement, you said 16th, 17th century,
Yeah.
is it connected only to American literature?
No, no, sir. It was also for to purify the Church of England.
Uh-huh. Right. What do you mean by purifying Church of England?
Like sir, from Roman Catholic. Uh,
Hmm.
fr- I'm recalling it. Just a second, sir. Hmm.
Okay, tell me names of one or two famous great Puritan writers.
Sir, John Milton,
Good.
and one more, sir. John Milton.
And John Bunyan. Have you heard of John Bunyan?
No, sir. I ordered Edward
Pilgrim's
Taylor.
Progress.
Sir, Edward Taylor.
Okay. Pilgrim's Progress. Have you heard of that novel?
no, sir.
Okay. So, history of English literature, Restoration period, uh, and Civil War period. See, Puritans were those people who protested the Protestants. Protestantism was a kind of anti-Roman Catholic movement that started in Germany in order to reform church,
Church.
right? Starting with Martin Luther as one of its main figures in Germany. Henry VIII, Tudor King of England, wanted to have an heir, male heir, because he did not have a male heir. So he needed to divorce his wife, which was not permitted in the Catholic religion. So he changed his own religion and religion of his country, England, into Anglican Protestant Church. Church of England as a Protestant church, and that gave rise to clash between Spain and France and Italy onward, because these are Catholic countries. So these are England is a Protestant country, but people were dissatisfied with Anglican Church as well. They saw it as a site of corruption, and it was closely associated with the royalty. So Anglican Church and monarchy were extremely close. So Tudors like Elizabeth the First and Church of England are extremely close, right, politically. So the movement started against both monarchy and the Anglican Church. It was led by people who were called Puritans, right? They wanted to reform the Reformed Church of England, right? Double reformation, and that's why they were called Puritans. And they had a very strict code of conduct. Stephen Gosson, I don't know if you've heard of his
Yes,
name,
sir.
wanted to ban. He wanted to ban drama in England, in poetry, to which Sir Philip Sidney responded by saying how great or important literature is, right? So Puritans were against theatre, against drama, against all fun. So they were frowned upon by many people, like Shakespeare. In Winter's Tale, you have comic characters who are Puritans. So Oliver Cromwell was one of the leaders of anti-church, anti-king section, and monarchy was destroyed. Charles the First was beheaded. Charles the Second ran away to France, Catholic land of Catholicism, right? And Oliver Cromwell ruled over England, and Parliament became a powerful force later on. So even when King was restored, brought back, that period is called Restoration Age. Now, why are we doing all this, discussing all this? Because a set of pilgrims from England set sail from England, and they were called Pilgrim Fathers. And their ship was called Mayflower, and it landed in America. And these Puritan pilgrims started these colonies, right? So Puritanism became one of the important religious sect, dominant sect, denomination of church in America. America was populated by Native Americans, right? The Incas and lot of tribes. So this Puritanism became a code, became a kind of important dimension of American culture, and many writers rebelled against it. So Hawthorne has this problem with Puritanism, which has a kind of very harsh outlook towards adultery and sexual relations, right? So Puritanism is seen as a kind of manifestation of super ego, dominance of super ego over id, because super ego is the moralistic, no saying adult parents that child internalize. Don't touch your body, don't walk like this, right? Behave like a girl or behave like a boy. This is how you should be. So those kind of injunctions that elders and parents give us are part of our unconscious superego. So this conflict in Hawthorne is seen largely in cultural terms as a manifestation of conflict between id and superego, is seen in the conflict between Puritanism and Hawthorne's own vision in Crew. So you really don't know what is being analyzed. Is it the cultural context? Is it Hawthorne's own personal conflict? Or is it the character's conflict? That is what it means. And Crew tries to modify. Yeah.
Because we know a little bit about Hawthorne. So
Yeah.
Hawthorne's say ancestors, they were a big part of the Salem witch trials, and then that is why he also, his name was originally Hathorne, and then he added that W to not have that association with his great grandfathers. So
Yeah.
and that is why again that kind of relates to the characters that he has in the Scarlet Letter. So very staunch, say having very Puritan value, being that godlike father, that strict father figure who that patriarchal figure. So
So that's a manifestation of superego.
yes.
So he sees characters as representing superego, but whose superego? Is it Hawthorne's superego, or the characters themselves are governed by their superego? It's not very clear. And Crew doesn't give much attention to these issues. These are contradictory things to say, right? But he seems to be interested largely in the thematic analysis. Focus is more on themes, and he also analyzes plots. If you look on page 48, right? Plots as Oedipal quest. So symbols as typical Oedipal symbols. Characters as fixated at various stages of Oedipal conflict. But किसकी Oedipal conflict? Writer की या character की? He doesn't clarify. And that is the problem there, according to Elizabeth Wright, with Crew's and use of psychoanalysis. For example, in many films have these two brothers. One is good brother, other is bad brother, or one is policeman and one is criminal. You can see that is a motive, right? And according to many people, it's splitting of human self. वो दो कैरेक्टर नहीं है, एक ही कैरेक्टर है. इंसान के दो हिस्से हैं, वो एक ही इंसान. So that is what we mean by archetypal. So you can see there is a connection between Crew and Jung, some connection there. And the next part is Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence analysis of American culture, again in the context of Puritanism, and he says all the writers are liars, and he is very unhappy with writers' response to the Puritanism in American society, in culture. Right? D.H. Lawrence himself came from working class, as we discussed in Terry Eagleton essay, if you remember, right? And the theme of organicism in D.H. Lawrence. So, but D.H. Lawrence as a critic was also deeply influenced by Freud, though he seemed to reject many of the key ideas of Freud. So, every critic is modifying something from Freud. They are not following Freud as a religious last word, but they are taking some of his ideas and modifying them for their own purposes, right? So that is the whole point. And the problem Lawrence has with Freud is that Freud wants to know things that lie beyond our understanding, right? So the desire to understand for D.H. Lawrence is connected with desire for power, right? Strangely, like Nietzsche and Foucault, you find that Lawrence says that Freud's desire to know unconscious part of your mind, one's mind, is a desire to control and have dominance over yourself, something that Lawrence dislikes. So why should you be? Because for D.H. Lawrence, knowledge itself is corrupting, right? It's power. So, so the whole project of psychoanalysis, which says that ego should replace id, right, is something that he dislikes in Freud. So you can see how Lawrence is not taking everything from Freud, but modifying Freud's ideas, rejecting, critiquing them for his own purpose. And then you have post-Freudian criticism, where you have this Ernest Chris, and as Riddhi was saying, this is an attempt to reconcile new critical ideas that you find in William Empson with psychoanalysis, right? So in some form, he is trying to uh, reconcile. And Riddhi asked, what do you mean by aesthetics of ambiguity? And that is connected to uh, Empson's theory, 7 types of ambiguity, right? And Empson says that ambiguity, or a multiplicity of meanings that you discover in literature, is not a sign of its inauthenticity or incapacity to tell truth, but it's the sign of its richness. It's the source of its richness. That unlike scientific discourse, which mean one thing only, right? Literary discourse means several things at several level, and this is the source of its richness. So ambiguities in language of poetry is not to be seen as its inferiority, as Plato would point out, that poetry misrepresents, right? It doesn't tell truth or does not reveal reality. Yeah. Yeah. So that is aesthetics of ambiguity, right? Ambiguity is, and that is also connects to I.A. Richards' idea of referential use of language and emotive use of language, right? He says that scientific discourse is referential use of language, and emotive has something to do with literary discourse, whose truth is not referential, right? For example, a poet may say that sun rises in the west, right? So you cannot really say he's lying, because his idea is to evoke emotional response rather than tell referential truths, as I.A. Richards says. So ambiguity of this kind, sun rising in the west, is source of a poetry's richness, according to Emerson, and that is what is meant here. She isn't here, but this is the explanation to her question.
There are some connectivity issues with her, I
Okay,
believe.
okay, fine.
So
Anything else? Yeah.
I have a very basic question. Like, suppose, sir, in some entrance exams or
Hmm.
if they ask, like, who termed the coin new criticism?
Hmm.
So, what could be the answer? Like, a ransom or Joel Spingarn?
Springer coined it, but the book was titled New Criticism by Ransom. So Ransom wrote a book called New Criticism.
Okay, so
Right?
for
So you have
yes,
to look at what are the options available. So if there is Springer available
hmm,
in the MCQ, then you have to select that.
okay. Otherwise, ransom.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
In MCQ, so you have to look at the options available. Yeah. Any other question? Any questions? Pankti, Kushi, Shikha.
Oh, no, sir, no, sir.
No, sir.
Any questions about structuralism that we discussed yesterday? And I have put the material in the group as well for reading.
Yes, sir, I downloaded it. Like, I still haven't gone through it entirely, but like, I
So
will.
maybe next week you can ask me questions about that.
Yeah, well, like, ouch, shit. Sorry, sorry. Like from yesterday's class, I don't have any doubts. So, like,
Hmm.
once I go through the structural one, I'll ask questions next week if I have some.
Yeah, closely associated with structuralism is something called Russian formalism. Though they are not directly connected, very often Russian formalists drew upon linguistics to study literature, right? Very much like structuralists do. Because one of the characteristic features of structuralism is use of linguistics as a model for decoding or model for explaining literature, right? And they primarily use Saussurean linguistics to look at any cultural phenomena, from a worldwide WWF wrestling to detergent advertisements, or advertisement banners or TV series or whatever, as Roland Barthes does. So Roland Barthes, ROLAND BARTHES, uses uh, Saussurean linguistics to decode or explain any cultural phenomenon, right? So culture itself is seen as a kind of language, a mode of communication, and this is one of the important features of structuralism, right? And people like Claude Lévi-Strauss would use Saussurean linguistics to analyze uh, myths, right? So his analysis of myths uses structuralist method, and so you find structuralism being used in several places apart from linguistics. So these are two important features of structuralism.
It was also used in anthropology, right?
Anthropology by Levi Strauss. It was also used in psychoanalysis by Jacques Lacan. And Jacques Lacan, I don't know if you have seen the blog that I have sent you, but you can take a look here. Jacques Lacan is an important psychoanalyst who uses ideas by Heidegger, Hegel, and Freud combined with the ideas of structuralism. So what he is arguing, and his writings are some of the most difficult writings to understand, because he is deliberately trying to challenge the idea of understanding itself, right? So he's extremely playful and difficult to read. Jacques Lacan is one of the most difficult authors that you can think about. What he does is that it's a kind of postmodern interpretation of Freud. By what do you mean by that? That he takes out some of the key ideas, or he interprets Freud, reinterprets him in a different way. He interprets Freud as a kind of anti-humanist or post-humanist thinker. And what do you mean by that? Is that human being is seen as center, human subject is seen as center of one's life in humanism, right? And the term often uses subject. You have heard of this term, subject? And the term subject has many meanings. Subject and predicate, as in grammar. Subject and the subject that you study in school and college, that is also subject. Then something which depends on something else as subject to change. These rules are subject to change, right? So it is not autonomous but dependent on something. And finally, king and his subjects, right? So you can see that the word subject brings out the fact that human beings are always already in a power network, and they are dependent on historical circumstances, right? They are subject to power, they are subject to historical context, and they are also in language, like subject and predicate, right? So subject, human self, is seen as something existing within language, right? And what do you mean by that? And Lacan draws parallels between the kind of splitting that Freud talks about between human unconscious and conscious mind. So human self is split. The motors and drivers of human life is the 75% of unconscious, and conscious mind is the tip of the iceberg. Remember what we talked about? So human self is split into two. Small part is seen outside. Known part. The unknown part is what governs human life, right? And this splitting of self is something that he connects with splitting of human self or subject in language. And what do you mean by splitting of human subject in language? Is the distinction between what is called enunciation and énoncé in French. Énoncé means the statement, I am hungry, right? It has subject and predicate, I am hungry. And anybody can say that. Shikha can say that, Tatsam can say that, Ankti can say that, Riddhi can say that, I can say that. So the I in the sentence, it does not really reflect or connect to me as a person. It can connect to any one of us. Am I making some sense when I'm saying this? So when Shikha says I am hungry, I stands for her. But the I does not actually refer to her. It can refer to anyone. Right? So on one level, the level of saying I am hungry, the level called enunciation, I and human subject are one. But at another level, grammatical level, formal level, I is just a place in language. It's just a position in language. I hope I am making some sense. So at the level of NNC, I am hungry does not have any subject. Anybody can use that. A robot can also say that. Computer can say that I am hungry. Right? So I am hungry as NNC has empty subject. While in enunciation it is full. Right? So there is this splitting of human self in language that happens. And he says both these things are the same. And he argues that unconscious is structured like language because of this splitting. This is a very famous statement by Jacques Lacan. Unconscious is structured like language. So what Saussure, going back to Saussure, says that what structure is made of absences and differences, and the relation between signifier and signified is arbitrary. Remember, कल हमने discuss किया था. So human subject, when is inserted into language, is inserted into the space of differences and symbolic domain of signs. Right? So when you say I am hungry, you are taking a position within linguistic system of utterance where I am hungry. You articulate it, right? As syntagmatic and paradigmatic. And you articulate your desire. भूख लगी है. जैसे कितने लोगों को लगी है आप में से या कुछ खा के आए?
ऐसे नाश्ता करके बैठे हैं.
नाश्ता करके बैठे हैं. तो जब भूख लगती है, when you say I am hungry, you are articulating your desire through a system of differences. So actually, your desire can be articulated only through symbolic or semiotic structures, without which you don't have articulations of desire. I am thirsty, I am hungry. And human being is inserted into place of differences and absences. So this human desire and unconscious is structured like the Lang, right? Lang parallel distinction, yaad hai? Lang as a system of sign, the structure. So structure and language mean the same thing. But Lacan would point out there is no center to this structure. It is decentered. There are only absences in this. There is only lack. And he plays on the word lack as Lacan. And lack on in the sign. And articulation of desire can only be through symbolic. And he makes a trifurcation between three domains of human existence. One is the domain where you think I am hungry yani main. You and I are one, right? As in the process of enunciation. So this domain is the domain of imaginary, where you imagine that you can achieve some sort of unity which you lost with your mother, right? In your infantile phase. You can go back to that kind of oneness with your mother. And but articulation of desire is only possible through through symbolic, and the symbolic is the second domain of human existence. And the third domain of human existence is real. So these are the three orders of human existence. Real can never be articulated or understood, or you can never be in touch with the real. You can only articulate your thoughts through the symbolic domain, because thoughts are after all language, right? Yes, no, maybe. You cannot think if you don't have language, right?
Yes.
Or signs, at least images. If you think in images, those are signs after all. So unless you are part of imaginary, there is no thinking, no articulation of desire. And this desire is always that of lack, and it's always postponed, according to Lacan, because it's lack. Hunger यानी क्या होता है? Hunger is just a word. वो empty signifier है. Right? Hunger can only be understood as in contrast to non-hunger. Remember, Sashure, there are only differences. So it's a kind of human desire cannot be satisfied in that sense. So he is creating a very different take on psychoanalysis, and he is trying to create a new theory of psychoanalysis that is based in semiotics. So you can read more about this in this. So he makes a distinction between need and demand. Need is something that can be fulfilled. भूख लगी है, खा लो तो आप वो fulfill हो सकता है. The demand is something that you can never fulfill, and because it is in the domain of symbolic. इसलिए असली खाना खाने से बंद नहीं होने वाली. Right? So you know how children articulate their demand. मुझे ये चाहिए, मुझे ये खिलौना चाहिए, खिलौना दे दिया तो खिलौना खेल के वो चाहिए, फिर वो चाहिए, फिर वो चाहिए, फिर वो चाहिए. Right? Demand can never be fulfilled. Objects keep on changing. Once you get that object, the need is fulfilled, demand continues. Right? So he says all speech, human speech, is a demand, and all demand is demand for love. Right? Demand for the original love that you got from your mother. Oneness with your mother, which obviously is impossible to have in the system of differences. I don't know how much sense I made.
So, sir, as you said that the third form real can never be articulated. So, sir, could we
Or
connect?
exist.
So, sir, could we connect real with original? Like nothing is original in this earth, like that.
No, real is something which is exists independently of our language. Right? And is different from imaginary oneness of signifier and signified. So our whole life is search for that love which we lost once we were separated from our mother. The classical Oedipal thing, right? Okay, so let's stop here. And I have given you material on psychoanalysis, which has also discussion on Lacan, which you can read up, right? And this blog, which I have sent. Or it's there. You find my blog on Oedipus and Anima. Jung के ऊपर है और Freud के ऊपर भी है.
We'll look
Right?
into it.
Yeah.
The same page, sir. I mean the same thing. Blog.
Or you can look for all the entries. You can go to the main page of this blog.
I mean, I did.
It has entries on several texts, but there are labels given on the right hand side.
Yeah.
And sir, what type of written assignments?
The written assignments that I have been telling you are largely using these ideas to read any text.
Achha, like I have done in Language of Paradox, like that.
Okay. But you have to do it in a proper manner.
Yeah.
So all of you are supposed to give 2 such assignments by the end of this entire semester.
Okay.
Right? They will be.
I missed it. Wait, which assignment? I was looking for that blog. Sorry.
There are 2 assignments that you are supposed to submit individually. Using these ideas and theories that we have been using discussing in your own reading.
Hmm.
So you can select any of the two theories and any of the texts.
And then apply it into
You can
the
also
text.
take up films if you want.
And so we have to do two of those, or like one.
By the end of the semester. So we will be
Yeah.
discussing all of them. So you have more
Oh,
options. Till now we have covered new criticism, structuralism, psychoanalysis, and Marxism.
Marxism and moral formalism.
Moral formalism of F.R. Lewis and others, right? And Raymond Selden and Habib are the basic texts.
Okay. And sir, will you be taking NTEM examination, or like it's upon university? What university will say?
In the thing that I sent you, does it mention? Yeah, of course. There will be an NSEM exam.
And so next week we have a presentation, like, or next class.
Yes, on structuralism, I want somebody to make a presentation.
Okay, put in the group.
So
We'll
just
inform the others. Yeah.
decide among you. So those who have not done, like Pankti and Kushi.
Amatullah
Yes, sir. Well,
and Rohit.
Are you presenting, Pankti, next class?
yeah, I will.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So have a nice weekend and see you tomorrow. Next week, not tomorrow.
Next Friday. Yeah.
My mistake. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Bye,
Thank you.
sir.
Have a nice day.
Yes.